All right, I'd like to thank you all for joining us for our final In the Black speaker event. This event is brought to you by the College of Business at the University of Nevada, Reno, and the Northern section of the Nevada chapter of the American Planning Association. Our theme today, as we bring together everything that our presenters have covered, is public-private partnerships. My name is Dr. Stallar Lufrano-Jardine, and I will be your host. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to our panel, Ms. Christine Adelaja, Mr. Kenneth Evans, Mr. Shondell Newsom, and Dr. Lavana Blair Lewis. We will begin with a short presentation from our presenters and then flow into the Q&A discussion. You may ask your question directly by raising your Zoom hand, or you may add it to the chat box if you'd like me to ask the question for you. Please stay muted throughout unless asking a question. And just a reminder that today's educational luncheon is worth a total of 1.5 AICP CM credits for the AICP members, and a recording will be available on the chapter's YouTube channel. So let's go ahead and give a nice warm welcome to Christine Adelaja.
All right, hello everyone. It's awesome to see you all again. For those of you that were a part of my presentation back, it feels like it was a long time ago, but I know it actually wasn't as long ago as I would think. I will do a quick recap as to what my discussion was about. It is on the YouTube channel, so I won't go into depth about everything because it was quite a long presentation. But to kind of dive in, the name of my presentation was Exploring the Strength of Diversity through Understanding, Inclusion, and Expansion. And so one of the things to kind of focus on as we talk about diversity, or kind of how I led the conversation, I started, was to talk about what is diversity, right? When we talk about diversity, people often think of what you can see, but not always, everything else that encompasses diversity. So, when we talk about what you can see, we're talking about, like race and color, gender, national origin, some of the age, things that are kind of visible, things that you can kind of assume sometimes incorrectly about somebody by looking at them, but not necessarily know all of that information. But diversity really is just a variety or differences. When we're talking about people, it's including and involving people from a range of different social and ethnic backgrounds and or different genders, sexual orientation, etc. And so one of the things I led you all in regards to the conversation when we talk about diversity in the workplace is actually our protected classes in the workplace, because that should be kind of a standard thought process. And we talk about a difference in thought and a difference in regards to how we can update some of these policies within our businesses, but also what we can look for in regards to like red flags in different areas. Because, legal, regulations and laws are a huge way that we dictate how we teach diversity, but also the different things that we have to kind of highlight when we are doing trainings and things like that. So understanding that race and color, gender, national origin, sex, which includes pregnancy, sexual orientation, and gender identity, religion, age, and disability and genetic information are all protected within the workplace. And there are legal regulations, laws, acts, you name it, that protect these individuals. And so when we talk about diversity in regards to kind of recruitment, in regards to when we like different thoughts in the workplace, you should be encompassing all of these individuals, not just the people that you would assume are diverse based off of how they appear. So some of the other things that we kind of touched on were some of the highlights that comes with providing more diversity within a company. Over a 3-year period, diverse companies see 2 to 3 times the cash flow per employee when compared to their less diverse peers. They have usually a 19% higher revenue than others. Like I said, go back to my presentation, you'll actually see the statistics and some of those different resources in regards to looking at those numbers. Other things we touched on as well were the recruitment, retention, and reputation piece when we talk about diversity. So diversity, as we kind of encompass it and we move forward, you looked for, at the base level, you're recruiting more diverse individuals. That's what we're looking for, trying to have a difference of thought, difference of perspectives within the workplace. And so recruitment is usually the first priority. It's like, how do I hire more diverse people, Christine? Well, there's a lot of ways you can do that. But some of the things you have to think about are the other parts of the wheel. So the reputation, the retention piece, because as you can imagine, your current workforce talks. They're not, they're going to speak to others about what kind of place they work for, what it's like to be in this diverse place or this lack of diversity in their workplace, and they're going to stay or leave, and that in itself will start to build your reputation as a place that is a diverse a great place to work, best places to work, but also just a diverse workforce. And so it's understanding that that retention piece can be huge. What are you doing for your current employees? When there's an issue within your workplace, what happens? Does it go to HR and then it just kind of dies within HR and we kind of just, bury it somewhere in the backyard so nobody has to talk about it later? Is it something that's brought to light so that it can be a learning method within the entire organization? Hey, this happened. Obviously, you never name names, but hey, this happened within the company. This is what transpired. This is how we handled it. What do you think? Could we have done this better? Maybe we should see other people's way of thinking so that we can bring it in and understand where we might be kind of missing the mark as we talk through that. And then reputation. What are people saying about you when you're not in the room? What in regards to your management style, say if we're just specifically talking about you, in regards to your management style as a colleague, as a workplace, what are they saying about your company? It's awesome, to be in a company that's very cohesive where everyone gets along. But sometimes you find that some of those companies, they get along so well because everybody is the same. And so it's not, it's not a dig. If you are okay with everybody in your company being exactly the same, so be it. But if you're in this conversation, you probably want to have a diverse workforce. And so it's understanding that, that like-minded people come together, and sometimes they start trying to find other like-minded people to build in this cohesive, very easy to be around environment, but then everybody is exactly the same. You literally have copy and pasted all of your employees. And so that speaks for itself. Someone will look at maybe your company picnic picture, or other things along those lines. They're like, wow, all of the people in this company are men. So if I were to apply for this place, I would stick out like a sore thumb. I don't know if I want to be that person. So it's understanding, branding in regards to images on your website, but also in regards to how other people see you will speak for your reputation, and then will bring in people to, the end all be all of recruitment, and then, inevitably the retention piece. So as we talked within the discussions, like how can you bring diversity to your company? There's typically 4 ways that we discussed in our discussion: was hiring a diverse workforce, evaluating internal structures and external barriers, empowering diverse emerging leaders, and creating diverse mentorship. And so all 4 of these things are kind of separated, but also can come together within, I say, one employee could experience all 4. But, hiring a diverse workforce, having a diverse benefit plan. So we kind of briefly spoke about how, we have a different generation of workers coming into the workforce, but also that are in the workforce that have different interests. In regards to retirement plans, obviously everybody, needs retirement, but you also are looking at, different perks that you see in some of these new businesses where it's, a loan repayment program where they help you repay these loans, or it's, going into some of these different places and having, getting money towards gym memberships if you are donating time as like a social service kind of scenario. So it's understanding that all of these things encompassed together is what can bring you some different diverse workforce. And there's a lot of really cool job boards, not just within the College of Business, but also outside of the College of Business that recruit, Black educators within higher education. You have able-bodied workforce job board where you're saying that you are a part of this support for these individuals, and you're moving forward in that path. And so evaluating internal structures and external barriers, you're wanting to see what is your internal structure like in regards to, HR, diversity trainings, all of these different things. Is it working? Have things changed? Have you been using the same thing for the last 20 years? Let's update that. Also, what about how you are actually advertising for this position that you are trying to recruit for? Is it necessary to have all of these different requirements within the preferred qualifications that you train everybody on anyways, because it's finding that, you know, different diverse populations, whether it's based off of gender, race, national origin, these different things have different risk adversity in regards to what they're willing to apply for. And so it's understanding that in some populations, you know, if they don't meet all of the requirements within the qualifications, they're not going to apply for the job. So understanding that, you know, if you're going to put something on your job board, do you actually want all of these qualifications within your application or within your the actual application requirements? Because if not, take it off. You're just deterring people that could have been great candidates. When we're talking about, you know, emerging diverse leaders, you know, looking for college students. Do you have internship programs that can help students that maybe don't have a lot of access to your industry? Maybe they don't even know how to get into it. How are you actually teaching people about what you do before it's time for them to actually move forward within your workforce? So maybe creating those connections young. You can always connect with the Career and Corporate Outreach Center at UNR, shameless plug, because our College of Business students are pretty awesome, and they do great things within the workplace as well. And then that kind of brings me to the creating diverse mentorship. And so how are you mentoring the next generation, or just anybody who doesn't really have access to what industry you're in, or the kind of career that you found yourself in? You know, not everyone takes the ABC route to their careers. And so talking about how you got there, you should try and mentor someone into how they can get to where you're at as well, or somewhere else. They don't have to actually go into your industry, but maybe you want to help them become a business professional or professional within the industry, because you never know what's next. So, you know, it's bringing them into those meetings. It's inviting them to speak at things that maybe people of their background don't necessarily get to speak at as often. So, you know, it's highlighting these really great new leaders, emerging leaders, colleagues, that aren't always invited into this circle. How are you figuring out how to invite them into places that they're not normally thought about? You know, looking at those invitation lists ahead of time, looking at where it's at, you know, in terms of accessibility. We can find some really cool spaces in Reno to do a lot of really cool events at some of these historical buildings, but are they actually accessible? You know, can everybody actually get to the building? Especially historical buildings sometimes can get around the accessibility, the ADA accessibility rules, which now keeps them physically being able to access the space that you invited them to, and they will, you know, reject that invitation without telling you why. And so it's understanding that these little things can be what creates a lack of cohesiveness within a business and create some of those bad reputations. So that's kind of my presentation in a nutshell. If you want to see the whole thing, you can go on the YouTube channel. I can talk about this for hours, so I'll make sure that I'm able to pass this on to the next presenter. But if you have any questions, do let me know. I know that we will have all of our information shared as well.
Thank you, Christine. Appreciate that. And next, I'm going to pass it over to Ken again to just do another little wrap up on what he presented on, any new thoughts he's had, and then we'll move into Shondell and Dr. LaVonna Blair-Lewis. Go ahead, Ken.
All right. Good, everyone. And I am pulling up my PowerPoint presentation here. Okay, here we go. Okay, can you all see my screen now?
We can. You're good, Ken.
Okay, great. Okay, good morning. What I wanted to briefly recap is the fact that what I talked about before was a conversation connecting social justice to economic development. And the reason why this is in line with public-private partnerships is because here in the Southern Nevada region, after the unrest of summer 2020, we had a discussion about what was it going to take in order to, on the one hand, prevent certain cycles from happening, but at the same time, more importantly, try to move forward as a region in terms of creating equitable communities. And from our standpoint, especially here at the Urban Chamber, one of the core tenets of creating an equitable community is making sure that everyone participates in capitalism, if you will, or in this case, economic development. So to that end, we embarked on a journey between the Urban Chamber, the Las Vegas Global Economic Alliance, and the Vegas Chamber. And this is what I shared in my previous presentation. What I talked about for background is the Kerner Commission report, and Stallar will provide you with links to both the original document as well as the 50th anniversary update that was publicized in 2018. But essentially what the Kerner Commission did, for refresher, is it was a commission that was sponsored or established by then President Lyndon B. Johnson to ask 3 questions. The first question, and this was after some of the unrest that was going on in the late 60s, specifically the summer of 67 in some of the places like Detroit, New Jersey, et cetera, asked 3 questions. What happened? Why did it happen? And what can be done to happen? And found out is the fact that unfortunately, things have been going and occurring in cycles here in America because we never really address or pay attention to the fundamental problems or challenges that we bring up. Key things that were mentioned as a result of a lack of economic opportunity, failed social service programs, police brutality, racism, and at that time, white oriented. And again, as I pointed out, I've provided the link so that you can look up the report for yourself. The key thing that I want to say at this point for sake of review is that, again, if you study America's history, what you'll see is that we go in these 20, 30, maybe at most 40-year cycles because we've never really dealt with and addressed permanently some of the social unrest that relates to racism in America. For example, if you look at what just happened January 6th, you saw the stars and bars, which is Confederate flags. In addition to that, you saw other elements that suggest that white male supremacists are still making an effort in America to control what goes on. In this case, it was the political system, but for sake of today's discussion, there's also a socioeconomic or an economic aspect to it as well. And this is what the Kerner Commission report pointed out. So when we had the conversation in Southern Nevada, what I attempted to do to promote some discussion, but more importantly, to discuss some or have some conversation about implementation and the pathway forward, is I asked 6 key questions that built on those original 3 questions in the report. The first question was, what were the economic conditions and or disparities that African Americans in Nevada faced in employment and entrepreneurship prior to COVID-19 and the recent civil arrest? Again, we did this after the summer of 2020. Number 2 was, what is Nevada and specifically the Southern Nevada region doing in terms of diversifying and expanding the economy? And what I would suggest is that this could also apply to a discussion in Northern Nevada, or for that matter, the entire state of Nevada. Why? Because right now, January, the governor just released the Nevada State Plan, which talks about recovery and resilience. The bottom line is, we know we need to diversify and expand our economy because currently 40 to 45% of our economy is hospitality and tourism based. So we know we need to diversify our economy. The question becomes, how do we make sure that everybody participates in that diversification and expansion, which leads to the next series of questions. Number 1, what steps have been or will be taken to ensure African Americans participate in policy making and planning for future economic development? We have a saying at the Urban Chamber of Commerce. We want to make sure that we're already at the table so we're not on the menu. The bottom line is if we're already at the table and participating in policy discussions and planning and preparation discussions, by the time the business opportunities, whether they be employment opportunities or entrepreneurship opportunities come about, we're already positioned to participate. So it's not simply enough to diversify and expand the economy. We want to make sure that we participate in that expansion and diversification. To that end, when we did our State of the Chamber, we had the GoEd director, Michael Brown, as part of our State of the Chamber. And what I'm happy to report is that as the GoEd director right now, and in the interest of public-private partnerships, what he has stated is that he has 2 priority goals that are also in alignment with the Urban Chamber priorities. Number 1, diversify and expand the economy. But then number 2, just as important to us, is make sure that we create an environment in terms of employment and entrepreneurism or business ownership that is inclusive of small, diverse businesses. And for our chamber, we have a lot of small, diverse businesses, so we're happy to see those priorities. The next question has to do with what steps have been or will be taken to make sure that African Americans more significantly participate in employment opportunities in the emerging markets. Again, the idea behind this is making sure that we position current and future generations to participate in emerging markets, whether they be information technology, advanced manufacturing, bolstering our healthcare system, wherever these emerging markets are, and we know that they are coming because it's a focus for GoEd and the overall state of Nevada, we need to make sure that African Americans are A, aware of these emerging sectors, and B, either preparing themselves through education and workforce development training, or B, preparing themselves to be entrepreneurs and business owners in this space, which leads to question number 5, which talks about what steps have been or can be taken to ensure that African American owned small businesses participate in future procurement opportunities. This can happen in 2 ways. It can either happen through direct sourcing of these small businesses through public agencies, or it can happen through direct sourcing via private corporations or other larger companies. The bottom line is we want to make sure that there are procurement opportunities for our small, diverse businesses. Finally, what efforts can we commit to educate everyone on the link between social justice and equitable economic development? Again, going back to the Kerner Commission report, what it suggested is that a lot of social problems can be solved with equitable economic development. The bottom line is everybody, regardless of where you live, for that matter, this is a global concept. If you have food, shelter, and clothing, and the means to get that, meaning economic employment, or it could be entrepreneurism or business ownership, if you have the ability to provide those basic needs, A, it cuts down on potential need for social programs or social services. But in addition to that, it'll cut down on potential interactions with the criminal justice system. So the bottom line is there's a connection between social justice and economic development. So we want to make sure as we move forward as a state that when we're talking about public-private partnerships, we pay attention to the fact that everybody needs to participate in those public-private partnerships so that ultimately we create equitable communities through equitable economic development. Last thing, just a reminder, and I'm sure these rates may have gone up by now because unfortunately, these statistics were pulled as of spring 2020, and we're about to go into spring 2021. So there's a good chance that these numbers have gone up, but what it suggested is that overall, small businesses lost or fell by 22%, but there was a disproportionate impact on African American owned businesses and Latinx owned small businesses. African American small businesses fell by about 40%, Latinx businesses by 32%. In contrast, active white-owned small businesses fell by less than 20%. So the bottom line is, once again, there's a disparity here that we need to address, and here's the reason why. Final thought, two things we see at the Urban Chamber. Number one, successful small businesses do three things. They employ people, they put their company resources into the community, and last but not least, they participate in political engagement. So to the extent that we address these disparities and try to come up with a higher probability of success for these small businesses, it helps our overall community. Because what I'll conclude with is, our motto is build businesses to build our community. So as we move forward with these public-private partnerships, what I would ask you all to keep in mind is those 6 questions I asked, and everybody doing whatever possible to address some of these disparities so that ultimately we create an equitable community where everybody has the opportunity to either self-actualize or reach a sense of fulfillment either through employment or entrepreneurism. And with that, I'll turn it over to the next presenter.
Thank you so much, Ken. We appreciate you recapping your important presentation there and sharing those thoughts with us. Next, we'll move on to Shondell.
Well, you know, Ken teed it up for me, and we talk a lot, so that wouldn't be surprising. One of the things that I want everybody to understand, that when Dr. King passed away, his last campaign was called the Poor Man's Campaign, right? So what he was talking about, he said, what good is it to having a right to sit at a lunch counter if you can't afford the meal, or you can't afford is it to have the opportunity to stay at the finest hotel if you have no money and you can't stay at that hotel? So while what Ken was leading into was really about being equitable, and let me just explain to people that equality does not always produce equitable results. And that's what Dr. King was talking about, that we can have everything be equal, but it's not equitable. And that's where people get confused all the time. And so when we talk about businesses and we talk about how do we level the playing field, let me give you, when I last spoke to this group, I talked about the Black wealth gap. And so in the second quarter of 2020, white households who account for 60% of the US population held 84%, $94 trillion of total household wealth in the US. Comparatively, Black households who account for 13.4% of the US population had just 4%, 4.6 trillion of total household wealth. Now we can celebrate the billionaires that we know of, the Jay-Z's of the world, the Oprah Winfrey's of the world, but we are still not on a level playing field when it comes to wealth. That's why when Ken talked about businesses, our business is now celebrating 15 years. But I'll tell you this, it's not just about the dollars that our business make, because that's the other thing that this society focuses on. They said, well, Shondell, you're doing pretty good. You've been in business for 15 years. You've had a successful award-winning business. But it's not just stopping at that point. It's all about the number of people we've trained over the years with our internship programs. We've hired people from UNR, UNLV, CSN, all of these different colleges and universities. We've also made an impact on our community by donating to our church, and like Ken talked about, political engagement. Recently, we are very, very proud of the fact that we've helped a lot of Black-owned businesses, Hispanic-owned businesses, small mom and pop businesses get the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program, and other grants. So we feel very, very proud that we've had that opportunity. But let me rewind for all of you, because I think people don't realize that history always repeats itself. When you go back to the Reconstruction era, and just for the sake of everybody who I don't know who knows what, so I'm just going to throw it out there, 1865 to 1877 was the Reconstruction, Reconstruction era. This is when everything was supposed to, the 4 million freed slaves were supposed to get, or 40 million, I believe it is, the freed slaves were supposed to get what come out of slavery, have an opportunity to become citizens and move forward with their lives. Well, that had a very, very bumpy ride for almost a decade. And we even had some Black folks who were had the opportunity to be elected to Congress, but that didn't help us either. You know, what kept happening to us as a society is we were always hit back with some new bill. For example, the Reconstruction Act of 1867 by Andrew Johnson, when basically that bill was put to put Black people back in their place. I mean, I'm just going to say it like it is. That's what the bill was done. That's what it was designed to do. And people say, well, you know, Shondell, that was a long time ago. But let's go back to, again, what are people trying to do right now? Is because Georgia stepped up to the plate. And let's not mince words here, because the economic fiber and capitalism is being threatened. And some people don't want America to become America. My father said that. Son, he told me that in 2009, he passed away right after Barack Obama was elected. The greatest fear of America is when America becomes America. When everything that is supposed to be afforded to all citizens is going to be done in the right way, in the right fashion. We're going to have the right economics. We're going to have healthcare. We're going to have equitable neighborhoods. We're going to have everything that everyone else has. That is the greatest fear. Hence, that is what the insurrection was all about. Is that now what happened during the Reconstruction era is when it appeared that Black folks were creating their own neighborhoods and they started to have access to their own wealth. That's when the KKK got strong. That's when the white supremacists got strong. And you just saw a repeat of those actions on January 6th. You saw a repeat because they did not want to move away from what they believe was threatening that lifestyle that they had, that comfort, and quite frankly, that privilege, right? You heard things like, you're taking away my freedom. You heard it. I mean, I heard it on video. I saw it on Twitter. I saw it on Facebook. You're taking away my freedom. Unbelievable, right? And so I want people to really understand, and those of you that are on the call that are listening, I did this purposely. I wanted you to hear some of the passionate things that really frustrate some of us, and some of us that are of this skin color, when you say taking away your freedom, but we've been going through this for 400 years. And we keep getting the bait and switch. We get Reconstruction. This is our third iteration of Reconstruction. And because let's just be totally honest, and I don't really know what your political affiliation is, but let's be totally honest. The only reason anybody was in an uproar during this last election is because they're being threatened for their economic conditions. They're being threatened with their capitalism. They're being threatened that, you know, there's going to be a level playing field. And more importantly, they're being threatened because it was Black folks that changed the election. It was Black folks that put Biden from fourth place to first place in the Democratic primaries. It was Black folks that actually got him elected, right? It wasn't anybody else. If it was anybody else, I don't think you have your insurrection. But they know that politically that we're getting savvy. And so it goes back to what Dr. King said. I don't think people care that we have a right to have equal jobs. I don't think they really care that we have all these different rights. I think they care that they feel like me having that right is going to take away from them. Now, let me give you the reverse of that, because I want to put it in context before I wrap up, because I really want to hear from the students and folks, and pass it on to Ms. Lavana. The NBA, the National Basketball Association, once upon a time, was, it was fledgling for a little while. They brought together the dream team. Now, when Christine talked about diversity, the dream team was diverse on purpose. There were some Black players left off that team to make sure that team was diverse, sacrificing that because people had already seen the Harlem Globetrotters. So they didn't want to send the dream team over with all Black players because all Black players would have sent the wrong message. They purposely had John Stockton, Christian Laettner, and a few other players of different colors so that we can show a different image of the dream team, the American dream team. Went over there, influenced the whole nation, came back. All of a sudden, you see 7-foot Chinamen coming over to the United States playing basketball. You see Frenchmen, German, Russians. You see all of these people coming to the United States. Guess what happened? That changed the economic fiber of the NBA. Now, Steph Curry makes more money than the whole Boston Celtics made back in the 1980s annually. So what I want people to understand is, and when Ken talks about we build businesses to build our community, we're building more than just wealth. We're also building a wealth mindset. My children, 3 of my children now are entrepreneurs because their dad became an entrepreneur, right? If in some families, if somebody becomes a lawyer, everybody will become a lawyer. In some families, if everybody become a doctor, everybody will become a doctor. I'm going to give one more book to you, Stallar. It is Think and Grow Rich, A Black Choice. Think and Grow Rich, A Black Choice by Dennis Kimbrough. He said, hey, you know what? If you buy a man a fish, you feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. You teach a man to own the pond, he can sell the fish, rent some boats, also lease some land. He can do all kinds of things. There's a bigger picture for us to understand. And when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, all of those things have to be wrapped around the economic fiber so that we can all live well. We can all eat well. That's what our goal is. And so I want everybody to really understand that when I talk about the Black wealth gap, this is where we measure. Are we closing that Black wealth gap? Because that's why you have riots in the early 1900s. That's why you have riots in the 1960s. That's why you have riots in 2019, because people are frustrated economically. And if they are still in those same neighborhoods, I don't care how many degrees we throw at our people. I don't care how many opportunities we throw at our people. If they can't afford to do anything or pay for anything or lift their families out of poverty, it is going to be the same cycle over and over again. So with that, I'll pass it on to the next speaker. But if you have any questions, you can always hit me in the chat box and I'll give you all the information I just talked about.
Thank you, Shondell. Appreciate that. Absolutely. All right. And to our last recap, Dr. LaVonna Blair Lewis, and then we'll get into the Q&A.
So good afternoon, everyone. And I did my presentation on race, place, and health on January 5th. And so the day before the insurrection at the Capitol, I did my presentation. And I've heard the term white supremacist used a couple of times. And so I want to make it very clear that white supremacy is not just about the people who were scaling the walls at the Capitol, the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers. White supremacy is about a system that is systematically designed to lock some people into advantage and lock others into disadvantage, right? Doesn't have to have a visible perpetrator. It can just be the rules of the game, the rules of engagement. It can be something as innocent sounding as fit, but it's those things that we do over and over again collectively that signal that the voices that matter are white, male, able-bodied, Christian, talking about the privilege that that's been mentioned before. And so again, it's like when I had to say that because I've had colleagues who have talked about the fact that the term white, they're not a white supremacist. And it's like, it's not that issue. It's about, again, systems that may be invisible to some, but are highly visible to the folks that have been constrained by those same systems. And so I talked about race and the fact that talking about race makes people uncomfortable. And my response to that is that I'm very comfortable making other people uncomfortable because no one has really cared about the fact that some people feel like their lives, their stories, their truth doesn't matter. And so there has to be a conversation about race because race is what we are socialized into thinking about different categories of people, right? We put people into boxes based on the racial identity. That is the history of this country. We've done it with Black people. We've done it with the Native American. We've done it with the Asian Pacific Islanders. And so that is the truth. It is an uncomfortable truth, but it is our unwillingness to deal with the uncomfortable truth that keeps us locked into conversations that lead some people to scale the building saying that we're taking something away from you, as opposed to recognizing that there are multiple voices that need to be heard, and that is the future. And so as Ken said, as Shondell said, it is a battle going on right now between the past and the future. For me, it's as simple as that. The idea of will we continue to protect some voices or will we recognize that, look, the future for this country, again, when will America be America is what's happening. And so I started off talking about the definition of supremacy. I talk about racism, and racism is a multi-level concept, right? Race impacts me as an individual. It impacts me when I'm in conversations with people who assume certain things about me because of my race. It operates at the individual level. It operates at the interpersonal level. It operates at the organizational level. Who gets in, who doesn't get in for the interview. Again, I use the term fit because I see it over and over and over again as something that's used to continue to let the same voices have relevance and meaning and opportunity. So it also exists at societal level. Right? It exists at the societal level because when Colin Kaepernick says, I kneel to protest police violence against Black people, society says he's kneeling to disrespect the flag, right? Which is more disrespectful, to kneel when the anthem is being played or to use the flag to spear people who are just doing their job. This is kind of what we're talking about. And so the issue of race is important because carrying that around day in and day out has literally taken lives, years of life off of people of color. We call it premature death, right? And so we heard earlier that COVID-19 has taken, in 1 year, has reduced the length of life in this country by 1 year for white people, 2 years for the Latinx population, and almost 3 years for Black people, right? And so what is going on such that the same epidemic can have such a disproportionate impact on certain groups of people? And so that's what I mean when I talk about race matters. Place matters because where you live, if you live in an environment where there are wells, I live in South LA, and I know a lot of people have heard about South LA, but there are a few things that you should know about South LA if you never get a chance to live here. A couple of miles away from my house, there are oil wells. And the data tells us that if you live close to that oil well, you have higher rates of cancer than folks like me who live a few miles away down the hill, but the issues are the same. I live in South LA, and so reasonably priced, organic and other healthy food, I may have to leave my neighborhood to go get it. And that's okay for me because I've got transportation, I've got resources, and if I want to deliver my house, I can do that. But if I'm in the senior citizen village that's right down the street, I don't have the luxury of getting in the car and going out of the neighborhood to get some the things that some people take for granted. And so when I say that race matters, place matters, making a healthy choice shouldn't be so hard just because I live in certain neighborhoods. And making those choices day in, day out, month in, month out, puts additional stress on me, which also can influence my longevity of life. Chronic stress, the stress of just trying to survive while being a person of color in some places is literally reducing or taking years of life off of people. Being in communities that themselves are traumatized. I live, for those of you who know a little bit about the music industry, I live very close to where Nipsey Hussle was murdered a few years ago. Rising star in the rap community, my neighborhood overnight became a tourist attraction. But the neighborhood feels the trauma of another Black person killed in the prime of life, and we're not just going to shake it off. For some people, there was no difference between May 24th, before George Floyd, and May 25th, the day of George Floyd. And so some people have been carrying that around for years and nobody was paying attention. With George Floyd, people started to pay attention. What other things are going on that may be influencing the health and wellness of people in different communities? As I said earlier, those are uncomfortable conversations because, in part, because there are people who really believed that with the election of Barack Hussein Obama, racism was no longer a problem in the United States. The election of Donald Trump dispelled that myth, but that tension still exists. It is uncomfortable to talk about the fact that we have never lived up to our aspirations around, what this democracy is really all about, right? From our founding, we've said you're different. In our policy making, we've said that you're different. Right. And so if we're going to kind of turn the tide, we have to be honest. And I will make it very clear. I hope that I've made my position clear. I mean, there are privileges that are unspoken, that are inherited, and have nothing to do with how much money you have in the bank. It has to do with the fact that you can go walking in the street and not end up dead. I'm in California, so jaywalking kills in California. Wife no longer has her husband, kid no longer has their parent because somebody decided that guy looks whatever. Privilege means you don't have to worry about whether or not you're going to get stopped just because you're doing what normal people do in the day-to-day. Running, walking, going to the grocery store, watching the birds in Central Park. This is all the legacy of the United States. And this is how all of that stuff is carried around in people's bodies. And again, there isn't a magic bullet that's going to make that go away. We need to understand that, look, health is a basic human right. It's very difficult to think about amassing wealth if you can't even get out of the bed, right? And so to think about the fact that within a year, we have lost over 500,000 people in this country. And the majority of those people are people of color. And I guarantee, and this is my last comment, I guarantee if the numbers were reversed, it would have been taken more seriously at the beginning. But when survival became a political choice, once again, it was people of color who lose in that game. And so I thank you for your time and I look forward to questions.
Thank you, Dr. Blair Lewis, excuse me, I'm trying to say too much here. I appreciate all of our presenters giving us a nice recap on what we went over the last couple of months. I know we started back in November, December, so it's great to have that wonderful recap, especially when we are all together. So before we get into the Q&A, and please add them to the chat or go ahead and raise your hand and we'll call on you there. We have spent a lot of time talking about the Black community treading water, right? And so what we're trying to do is get through the day-to-day, get through the issues that we're facing, as Dr. Blair Lewis talked about, taking years off of our life, being in that system, having that stress to survive, maybe being in a workplace that doesn't appreciate who we are, or not being able to support our community in the way we would like to. So, we've spent a lot of time treading water, and we haven't had that representation at the top of the systems that could benefit us. So we're starting to think about how to really infiltrate those systems, how to make sure that when we get to the top, we don't make those same mistakes. So we really started this series with understanding and context. And what we want to do in the last 40 minutes here, our goal is to make sure that all the information that has been provided so far leads to calls to action. So if we can continue that conversation kind of in that spirit of, what can we do to better this system? What can we do to help the community, Black business owners? And then what we're going to ask in about 20 minutes here, so go ahead and write it down and get it queued up, is what are your wows? What is it that you think you can do in the next week? What is one act that you can do in the next week that can really help the Black community? Because our individual rights don't relieve us of that collective action. And those decisions really have an impact on our community. So in about 20 minutes, I'm going to ask everyone to start adding their wows, their impact in the next week to the chat, so we can kind of see what everyone's thinking, what everyone's interested in doing. But we'll go ahead and kick off the Q&A. Is there anyone out there that would like to start for us? Great. And I think a good jumping off point actually might be Ken, Shondell, Lavana, and Christine. Maybe you guys want to add in your wows as well, or what is one thing after kind of listening to everyone talk today that you might be able to do in the next week? Christine, do you mind if actually, Ken, you unmuted, so I'll kick off with you.
Okay, I saw a question here, but I'll start with my wow is this. I'm not sure whose dog is barking there, but
We'll take care of it.
oh, okay. All right. Another active participant. My wow is this. I talked about the fact that we're going in cycles. So my wow is to snap the cycle. My mom taught me and raised me, learn the system, master the system. And the system she was talking about is the economic or capitalistic system, as well as the social political aspects of the capitalistic system. My corollary is create the next system, next in capital letters. So that means two things. Number one, it means as the president of the Urban Chamber, I do my best to make sure that our current small, diverse business owners are doing well. In the case of COVID, they survived to thrive. Get them through the initial COVID-19 period, but more importantly, as we diversify and expand our economy, position them for future procurement opportunities in emerging markets. The second part of that is preparing the next generation, or what we call next gen at the Chamber. And that means actively and proactively, and in some cases, moving outside my individual comfort zone to identify young entrepreneurs, young people, some of which may still be in high school, to be the next generation of entrepreneurs and business owners, and then doing our part to prepare them. So that's my wow.
Great. Thank you, Ken. And I think it's really important to find ways to help business owners be resilient, because even if we didn't have COVID, we could be dealing with climate change, we could be dealing with community issues, unrest, uprising. So the point to really bring the business community together and those businesses to be resilient, so that they have a fighting chance when these different issues come up. Christine, do you want to go next with your one act over the next week?
Ken, that was awesome. I was thinking as you were saying, I was like, what's going to be my wow? So I work primarily with students. I am an academic advisor as my day role from day in and day out at the University of Nevada, Reno. I teach, as well as something I forgot to say in my recap, is I teach a class called Diversity in the Workplace. But oftentimes I'm a part of conversations talking about recruitment of new students, specifically students of color, Black students within the College of Business and also within the university. And I think my wow that I try to follow anytime I'm in a meeting representing the thoughts of students or the ideas of what they may think is bringing in the narrative and the representation of the 1% of students, of those Black students, of those first generation Black students, of just first generation students of color, any kind of student that isn't the majority, is bringing in that perspective of everybody has access to the same things that our stereotypical student does. And so it's making sure that when we're having these conversations, especially now, we've all seen it with school going virtual for the last, now it's like a year, almost exactly a year. The assumption that all students, I know on the, that we've had within K through 12 and in higher education, that all students had access to technology when they got home. That they weren't sharing a cell phone amongst a family of 5 as their access to technology. Now you have 3 children having to go to school full time on their parent's cell phone, who also needs their cell phone for other things. And then in regards to, say, whether it's professors, administrators say, well, if a student doesn't have access to a computer, they should just go get one. Like that doesn't make any sense. Like, how did they take their classes before? It's like, well, we have computer labs all over campus. They've never had to say anything. They never had to out themselves as not being able to afford that because of the things that we made on campus on purpose for those accessibility purposes. And so I think my wow that I try to embody in everything I do is to highlight those for those students who don't have access to the same things that some of our more fortunate students have, but also for those students that are too afraid to say something or too ashamed or embarrassed to say, hey, I don't really know how to do any of this. I know my mom went to college, or I know that, so-and-so has done this before, but I have no idea what I'm doing, and they say this to me in private. And so I want to make sure I highlight to that for other people who may not ever come into contact with these future students or current students, or future individuals for that matter, making sure, and that if anything I highlight in my diversity conversation is don't ever assume anything about anyone, especially people that have been disenfranchised. Don't ever assume that just because we're in 2021 that all of a sudden it's better. They may still be just as misinformed now as they were 60 years ago. And it could just be based off of not having access to, reading, understanding that not all individuals are at the same reading level, as you are at, or, understanding that not everyone has accessibility of even understanding how to do some of these scholarly research that we all, especially on the academic side, we've probably done, till our hair falls out, understanding how to use some of these platforms. So, yeah. Like I said, I get very passionate about this, so I have to always remind myself to stop talking.
You're good, Christine. Thank you. And then we have the questions coming in. So Lavon, if you don't mind, I'm going to pass this one over to you. We have, how do you react when discussing the Black Lives Matter movement and comments are made that all lives should matter?
So my response to that question has evolved over time. So one response that I had was, when we focus on breast cancer awareness, no one ever says, well, all cancers matter, right? I mean, it's not a question of whether or not something matters or not. It's about what needs the most attention right now, right? I mean, it's like the fact that we have to talk about the fact that Black Lives Matter means that we have been getting a message that tells us, well, maybe we don't. And so since other people don't see it as something that needs to be amplified, it's our responsibility to do that. So I understand that the Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter, all lives matter. It's like that's never been the issue because, again, all lives aren't targeted because of the package that you happen to be in. Some bodies have been targeted, right? And so that's the truth. Now, I want to make it very, very clear that I can't force you to accept the truth or my truth, but I can make sure that you get it. And so I'm going to just kind of share my wow, since it's, because it's linked to that. I'm going to keep teaching, because I understand whether somebody's in my 18 years old in my social justice class, or somebody is 80 years old and a board member in an organization where everybody looks the same. Information is needed, right? And I think that people do things that cause harm for one or two reasons. One, they don't know. That's why I'm an educator. Or they don't care. I'm not going to lose sleep over people who say, I don't care about this issue, because my goal is to find the ones that are willing, who are teachable, and help them to develop their own toolkit to address these issues, because I'm invested in people, right? I mean, I think you move hearts and minds with money or people, right? And I have a lot more access to people than I have to money. And so that's the focus of my attention. And so just to help people for me, I have a very simple, kind of agenda in terms of what I do. And my agenda is to get people to go into a space and ask themselves the question, how can I make things better? Because I is all that I control, and I hope to influence other people. But at the end of the day, I'm doing everything I can to get people to understand you're part of the problem. You should also be part of the solution. What are you going to do to make things better? And so that's my wow. Keep getting people to think about your curiosity, your empathy, that lets you recognize that you've got skin in the game. And the sooner we acknowledge that, I think the further along we're going to be in these discussions.
Thank you so much. And then to kind of both those points, it's really about that growth mindset. And so if we are thinking about learning and getting better and how can we help, we always keep in the back of our mind, what do I need to know going forward? It doesn't, matter if you struggled with that before. If you just have the willingness and the determination to learn it going forward, there are always people out there willing to help you, right?
Let me tell you.
Shondell, along with your comments, because I know you want to add that, but can I also ask you another question to add in with that? It was about the emerging markets and that they've been mentioned several times. So a participant asked, what markets should we be paying attention to? And I specifically wanted to ask that to you and to Ken. Okay. So go ahead and with your other comments, and if you could sprinkle that in there, that'd be great.
Yeah, definitely. Ken, we talk to the governor's office every day, every week about these emerging markets. So I'll get to that. But the biggest thing that was very important, and I hope people don't with what Ms. Lewis is saying, the biggest thing that we have to understand is in our response, it's not our, we're not responsible for people's behaviors. We can only tell you what we know and our experiences, and then you make a decision, because that, again, that's your free will. But here's what I say to the whole Black Lives Matter. It's just like somebody before and said, hey, Shondell, I understand what it's like to be poor. And so that's not the same thing. What Ms. Lewis is talking about is the fact that no matter what I do, I'm always going to have this black skin, right? And let me explain to you what Black matters. Everybody thinks it's the George Floyd. It's because he had a counterfeit bill, and that he shouldn't have been in the situation where the police were bothering him in the first place, or Rodney King was driving too fast and the police shouldn't have been there. If you heard what Ms. Lewis said, you could be walking across the street and doing absolutely nothing, and the police will bother you. That happens to no one but Black people. That doesn't happen to everybody. That doesn't happen to a white male. And it happened to me as a business owner, driving to my office with the key in one of those secure buildings, put my key in, drove through the turnstile, went to the door, put my code in, and a police officer still asked me what was I doing there. So who happened to be my friend, and the sheriff talked to that police officer, but what if it's not a guy like me? Many other things could happen. And that tells you right there that has nothing to do with my economic status. It has nothing to do with me pulling up my bootstraps, getting an education, serving in the military. All that stuff meant nothing, but he just saw a Black man. And I was in a suit and tie, not a hoodie and jeans. So when people talk about Black Lives Matter, you solve that problem and then you can talk to me. But they haven't solved that problem in 400 years plus. They haven't solved that problem. So going to the other P, and so one thing I'll say this, there are 3 E's that people have to really, really focus on if they want to understand Black people, or if you want to understand any culture. And my mom, who was an educator, told us we have to have these things. So I got 3 E's for you: education, exposure, and experience. You have to be educated on the culture so you could get rid of all of those different biases. You may even still have the biases, but you have a different way to look at them. Like I used to think that people on the farm were poor and this, but my mom sent me to a farm so I could see how farm people live, right? So sometimes people have to come to the neighborhood so they can see how we live. And as opposed to them just saying they're gonna watch it on TV or Netflix or something like that, come in the neighborhood and hang out with us for a little bit, right? Exposure is just that. You get to hang out with different people. You get to go to church with them, go in the neighborhood, spend a few days with them, and get the feeling of what happens when you see those things. A lot of people have seen that, guess what? The behavior doesn't change when white people are hanging with me. I could be sitting in the car and they won't change the behavior. Those other people will still come and they'll just look at the other white person and say, well, you just hanging with them, so you getting a piece of this too. It doesn't change. And then what I talk about is when I talk about the experience, get the experience of what it's like to walk in somebody else's shoes so you can empathize with them. Gain the experience. See what it feels like. I mean, back in the day, somebody did it. They painted themselves Black and walked through the streets and saw how it was different when they painted themselves and looked like a Black person. It was totally different. And they did a report about it. So now, as far as the emerging markets, Ken and I talk to the governor's office all the time. There are so many different markets that Ken can talk about the report. There's a report that the governor put out about his economic agenda, and I encourage everybody to read that report. Go through that report. Look at where he's talking about IT. Talking about green energy. Talking about different technologies and different industries like the health industries. What are going to be our lead indicators in the next few years? And that's if I was anybody starting a business, if there are any entrepreneurs, entrepreneurship is not about you chasing money. That's a myth. Entrepreneurship is about you chasing those markets or chasing those needs, and then you fulfilling those needs. And Ken and I had a discussion the other day, and there was a great quote by Warren Buffett that said that impatient people chase money. What is it, Ken? I'm sorry, I had it. I couldn't. I know money.
You got it. You got it. Impatient. Hey, I'll hop in real quick. Impatient people chase money. Money chases patient people.
Yes. And patient people are people who understand that entrepreneurship, it's a myth that you're an entrepreneur just because you're making money. That's not what entrepreneurship is. Entrepreneurship is about fulfilling a need in your community, and then you get compensated for fulfilling that need. So the better you fulfill that need, the more you make it. So it goes back to like Miss Lewis was saying before. People do interchanging words. And then if you go back to the root of the word, you find out what it really means, as opposed to you going off of somebody just saying what their version of it is. And one of the things that is important for us when we talk about emerging markets and all of that, or the Nipsey Hussles, people, when you start looking at building a business, build a business based off something that people need, want, or desire. And you'll be successful in business. But Ken, you can talk about that report just
yeah, very quickly, because I know we've got some other questions coming up. What I did is I put in the chat room, if you go to the governor's office, economic development, and I put the name of the office as well as the hypertext link in here, you'll see that very prominently displayed are two key documents. Number one, the Nevada's plan for recovery and resilience. I mentioned the fact that we have to diversify and expand our economy. Some of those sectors are, for example, advanced manufacturing, healthcare. We need to bolster our healthcare system. There's information technology. In addition to that, there's an automation of our hospitality and tourism industry that's going to occur. At the same time, there's going to be automation of other industries as well. In the area of information technology, cybersecurity is going to become a very big deal. But the bottom line is, if you take a look at that plan, I would suggest you ask yourself one of two questions. Either A, as a potential employee, where do I fit into those emerging markets or sectors? Or B, definitely as a small business owner or future entrepreneur, meaning I know there's students that are thinking about opening up businesses. Don't start a business where the economy is now. Think about starting a business where it could be going. For example, it's been said that some of the jobs, some of the business opportunities probably haven't even been thought of yet. So if you think 20 years ago, before there was a burgeoning internet, who would have known we'd have e-commerce? So again, the point there is, think about where the economy blueprint from the governor's office of economic development in terms of where they want to take the state.
Right.
And what I'm happy about is, as an urban chamber, we were involved on the front end and provided input, again, to make sure that small, diverse businesses, in particular, African-American owned businesses, would be a part of the pathway forward.
Good. Thank you, Ken. I appreciate that. Okay, a couple other questions coming through. Shondell, I have a big ask of you.
Yes.
Can you add into the chat,
Mhm.
aside from the bills passed, what else during the Reconstruction era stopped Black people from achieving, and just to see what we should look out for today? So I'm going to have you add that into the chat
Okay.
while I ask this other question of the group. And let's see here, maybe Christine can give us a start on this one. So when we're thinking about our public-private partnerships, one of our University of Nevada, Reno presidential candidates wanted to partner with apartments around the university to impose rent control. Obviously, that would be something that would highly help minorities. And so our current president does not seem to have that as a priority. So how might students help build these partnerships?
So that's a great question, Serene, just because I can see who had the question. So students can definitely have a lot more power than they think they do, especially when we go into the span or the scope of higher education, right? You know, oftentimes it's, you know, people think of these like pearly, like prestige kind of scenarios in regards to who's making all the decisions. And in a lot of cases, it is the upper administration that makes a lot of really massive decisions that then trickle down amongst the entire university. But realistically, you know, a school, although, you know, they don't like us to talk about it this way, higher education is a business. You know, it is definitely a money-making business. Even if you are a public institution, people make money off of, or I shouldn't say people, the institution of higher education makes money off of students. So you are one of the largest stakeholders in regards to, you know, what schools can and can't do. So I think in this kind of area in regards to the partnerships, it's talking and getting a base of students, whether it's through, in UNR's case, ASUN, so the government base, that can sometimes push these agendas and narratives without necessarily having the university involved. Because a lot of times the higher up administration, they don't have the same constraints the students do, right? You're talking about a massive socioeconomic status difference between a president who makes probably roughly, maybe I shouldn't put them out there, but usually make around, you know, 6 figures, sometimes upwards into the 200s and 300s. And you have a student who is, you know, for lack of a better term, broke when it comes to what they can and can't afford. And so it's understanding that the buy-in may not be there. So sometimes you have to create enough of a movement to get administration or other people going. And that's kind of been the basis, I think, for a lot of different things that we've done within the Black community. If you understand that, not everyone is going to support you, even when it comes to legislation, even when it comes to supporting the community, and you have to get the community sometimes started before you actually get the people that should have been putting it into place in the first place. But that's just a start to it. I don't know as much about the economics of, getting partnerships with like apartment complexes. But obviously the other issue too is that apartments are also businesses. And in Reno, we've seen the boom in regards to rental prices. And they're allowed to charge, Las Vegas actually has seen this as well. They can charge whatever they want because they understand that you're going to pay it. There's a lot of students that will pay it because their parents pay for it or they have a lot of throwaway income. So it's just a matter of figuring out, who also stands to benefit from some cost adjustment and some protection in regards to not hiking up the prices, and how can we get everyone together to push this narrative.
Would also add the possibility of getting the city involved, right? And so seeing if other stakeholders, other shareholders can push groups into, doing the right thing or doing what's good for the community, and just seeing who else is out there to help push that conversation. Go ahead, Shondell, didn't mean to interrupt you there.
I'm going back to what Ken said. If you understand that when you talk about political engagement, sometimes we're too late to the party. What you want to do when it comes to those type of situations is be at the front end of policy. Make sure that you are sitting at the table when they're crafting policy. Don't wait till they craft policy and then go object to it, because it's too late by that point in time, depending on how long they meet or when or how hard it is to undo it. We always say you're either at the table or you're on the menu, and you don't want to be on the menu, you want to be at the table. So I encourage people to get involved early on before these decisions are made, and just be active. Sometimes you don't know when those decisions are made, so you just got to stay active until you hear that whistle. You're like, wait a minute, that's going to impact me.
Good. Thank you. I appreciate that addition there. Absolutely. The goal is to get us in those decision-making processes so we can make the better decisions, having had the empathy, the understanding, have gone through what we've gone through, then be able to take that, share that with others that don't have those same exposures and experiences we do, and then share with them why that's so important so that they can, again, walk a mile in our shoes.
And again, it goes back to history. You guys got to understand that the whole civil rights movement, a lot of these movements were done by students, right? A lot of times students feel like, well, my voice doesn't matter. I kept hearing that during the election, but really it was the students were the ones that really made things happen for the civil rights. I remember John Lewis was a student. He wasn't a grown man. And remember, Dr. King was assassinated. He was 39 years old. A lot of times what I'm seeing in our communities is young people are saying, well, I'm not making a difference. It's not going to matter. But you don't know that. And you come with a whole different perspective. And just like Ken said, that's why we're doing a next generation movement at our chamber, because we want them to understand that this is your future, right? This is, unless you want to go through what we went through the last 40 years, I suggest you change it.
Yeah. And to understand that collectivism, one person can struggle, but eventually that one person gains traction. And as those people come on, you build that snowball that's going to come crashing down the hill, and it's going to get people to move out of their way to change things for the better. So we have a bunch more questions. I want to make sure we get to them in the last 10 minutes. So for Lavana, if you don't mind me asking, what's your advice for Black students, specifically Black women, seeking to enter a field that is heavily dominated by white men?
So as that came up, I wanted to make sure that I had a couple of quotes ready to go. And these are kind of Shirley Chisholm, the first Black woman to run for president. And one of the statements is, if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. So this idea, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. Basically, again, it's like, people aren't going to we have to recognize that people aren't going to necessarily want to share power, right? As I said earlier, we're in a battle for the past versus the future because it really is around power. And power requires persistence. You have to be willing to exercise your voice and take risk. And I think I don't want to understate that, because I'm surrounded by people who see things and want things to change, but they're afraid of speaking up. And so I'm since I have a role that's about talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, I get paid to talk about those issues. So I bring them up for people. But I think you just have to recognize that, you have to be comfortable with who you are. Because I operate from the inside out. I'm a Black woman, and I know that's what everybody sees when they see me, but I see my power. It's like, there's, I'm a Christian, my faith carries me. And so when I walk into a room, God is my superpower. And so I just want you to understand your value, right? When you know what you bring to the universe, nobody can tell you that doesn't matter. I know with confidence that I exist on the planet for two reasons. Number one, I've already talked about, I'm very comfortable making other people uncomfortable. And I live to make the invisible visible. Some of the stuff I see, other people don't see it. And so I get paid to do those things. And once you know what you bring into the room, people can't devalue that, right? It's like, people may not like the fact that you're the expert on it, but it doesn't change the fact that you're the expert. And each of us is expert if it's in no other thing but my life experience and what those experiences bring to this issue. So my thing is that, look, can't nobody keep me out without my permission. And so the question is, are you going to give people permission to keep you out of spaces that you're prepared to own and to lead in? Because again, that's really the challenge. No, everybody's not going to accept your role in those spaces, but it's not a popularity contest, right? It's like, I'm there because, I get things done, right? I'm there because I'm honest about what I'm doing and why I do it. I don't apologize for speaking my truth. And again, it's like everybody, it's like, it's not, I can't say it any clearer than that, other than the fact that once you know who you are and what you bring to any room, that's all that matters. People can try to dismiss it, discount it, discourage it, but they can't do that without your permission. I just don't give people permission to tell me what I can and can't do. That's my job, not somebody else's job.
I absolutely love that, LaVonna. And as a person that has struggled to understand where their seat is and what they can contribute, obviously I feel like I can do that, but have a hard time projecting that in those spaces. It takes a lot to be able to tell yourself you are worthy, you are, you can provide information, content, support, whatever it is. Again, even if you are just an expert on your experiences and what you've seen and done. And so if you're a person that's chronically pushed down with racism and your economic status and where you fit socially, it's much harder to feel that you're part of that. So that's why we have the resources and coming together collectively, things like this, or groups or places you can be part of to help you build up that confidence and get you to where you believe in yourself so you can project that to others as well. So thank you. Love that point. And then I think this is going to be our last question. Ken, I hope you don't mind if I pitch it over to you. So we've asked, I see a lot of companies congratulating themselves for posting a black square, in terms of, they are there for us, they are part of the community. So how do we demand that actual accountability? How do we find out if they followed through? Things like that.
I would say quite simply, to start my response, look at the results. Numbers don't lie. If they don't have a diverse amount of people, not only in the general workforce, but in leadership positions, those are the results you're looking for. In addition to that, if they don't have a diverse group of suppliers or sub-tier companies to do business with, whether they're a public or a public agency or private corporation, look at the results. but don't just stop there. The way to hold them accountable is to provide a solution. What's in my background is that I'm a civil engineer, so I'm trained to come up with solutions regardless of the problem or the challenge. It just becomes a matter of, do we have the resources? And those resources can be time, attention, but they can also be the soft resources, I call them, of wanting to do something and having a mindset to do something. So what I would suggest is, if you want to hold them accountable, don't just point out the challenge, bring a solution to them as well. For example, we've heard, like I mentioned, I'm an engineer. So we've heard people say in the STEM arena, oh, we can't find people. Well, you know what? I've identified from time to time, hey, I see a lack of diversity either in your general STEM workforce or definitely in your leadership in a STEM environment. I don't leave it there. When they say, oh, well, we can't find, I go, you know what? I can help you out. I can take you to an HBCU where you can find individuals that either A, can be part of your workforce, or B, maybe 5, 10, 15 years from now can be part of your middle management or higher. So again, number one, look at the results. Numbers don't lie, but at the same time, when you're holding them accountable, provide them with the solution, even if you have to be a little bit proactive and put some time and effort into the initial steps of making the solution happen.
Thank you, Ken. Spot on. So as those businesses, continue to see the issues that Christine had definitely brought up, you think about ways they can fix that, not just in the, right now in the immediate need, but how do you grow that going forward? Do you sponsor groups? Do you help send people to trainings, certifications? Do you make it easier for people that are disadvantaged to come into your workforce? Google, for example, lowered the requirement on a college degree. And so, if implemented successfully, has the ability to open up for people that couldn't obtain that degree or could get that certification. So just seeing the programs that they have and how they execute them, as you said, can definitely open up. Is this company really standing behind what they say? Or are they just projecting that and not actually following through? And the companies that follow through are where we want to put our resources and our effort and our time, and make sure that we support what they're doing. Excellent. Okay, well, we have hit our time. We are right on. Look at us. So we are going to end our meeting here. Please expect a short survey after this series, because we want to know more about your thoughts on everything that we have covered. We want to know what that action is that you're going to do in the next week to support the Black community. So on behalf of myself, and Fred Steinman and the College of Business at the University of Nevada, Reno, and the Northern Nevada American Planning Association, we want to thank Christine, Ken, Shondell, and Lavana for their time, their desire to educate us, and their support. Again, we will post today's presentation and chat on the YouTube channel and share with you all that link. We will also include a page of different resources that our presenters have shared with us that they really feel can advance the conversation. So we just want to thank you from the bottom of our heart for being here today, for being part of this important discussion. And we look forward to seeing everything you guys do out in the community. So thank you so much for your time today.